Horodelsky in for Howard Green. Well, shares in Twitter are getting slammed in the after-hours session. The social media company released its first quarter numbers after the close. On earnings per share, Twitter did beat the street's estimate, coming in right at break even. Twitter's revenue came in at $250 million. That's up 119% compared to the same period last year, and better than analysts were expecting. One area of concern, though, for Twitter appears to be user growth. That slowed to 25% from 30% in this quarter versus the previous one. For more, we turn to Kosha Gada. She's a principal at A.T. Kearney, and she is in New York. Kosha, let's go through it. Looking at all the numbers, it looks like the financial metrics are strong, better than the street, but it's those user metrics that people are focused on. What's your take on the numbers so far?
That's right. I mean, I've said before on this network and other networks that I think the fundamental value proposition that Twitter has to offer is sound. Fundamentally, the question is there value for a service that connects people to communities, and people to brands? And if you believe that that is a fundamental value, which we certainly do, in society since the beginning of time, then they definitely serve that. The challenge, as you mentioned, is that stagnant or sort of tepid user-based growth that they've been experiencing and continue to experience, which is kind of what's dampening expectations of people who look at this company, and that's the biggest challenge they're going to have to overcome for their long-term sustainability. When
we look at something like available users, monthly available users, that's 25% growth. Yes, it's down, but on an absolute basis, those are pretty good growth numbers. Street wants more. Are their expectations too high?
I think the question or position that Twitter, is finding itself in is the expectations out there, or the belief is that this really needs to be a mass social media platform similar to Facebook and others like it. And I think the question is really, and that's something that Twitter, I'm sure, is grappling with and has to answer, is whether their destiny is ultimately to be this mass user base or social media tool that appeals to everybody across generational divides and all types of segments, or is it really destined to be a valuable and profitable business that's really targeting a few segments out there, people for whom a communication platform or megaphone is really of value, people in the PR space, media personality, journalists. Those are the kinds of users that are highly engaged today with Twitter, and what their user base really very much skews towards them. So the question is that sufficient servicing them, or do they need to be mass? And I think there's a little bit of an expectation reset that might need to happen, because if the expectation is for them to be mass, then that's definitely a big hurdle for them to climb.
The Bulls talk about MoPub, and in the company's earnings release, they also talked about MoPub. We now reach more than 1 billion iOS and Android users each month, making us one of the largest in-app mobile ad exchanges in the world, and the only one at scale to offer native in-app advertising. The Bulls say this is absolutely the key to Twitter's growth, and that ad growth that was pretty strong in the quarter as well. Give us your perspective on MoPub and how important it is to Twitter.
That's a great question, Francis. So MoPub is one in kind of a string of 6 or 7 acquisitions that they've made just in the last year alone. And it's really meant to augment a few key aspects of their strategy. So they're kind of laying out 3 elements of their growth strategy. Number 1 being advertising. It's about 90% of their revenue today, and they're executing very well against it. 2 is kind of figuring out how to monetize their user base and big data and insights around that. And then 3 is really being able to scale into the next device that's out there. And right now that's mobile. Mobile advertising is the fastest growth area on the web. So MoPub really fits in there in terms of their advertising strategy and trying to stay ahead of the curve and be relevant for that, as well as their mobile strategy, where they're doing quite well, better than a lot of their peers. About something like 75% of people that access Twitter are doing it on a mobile device, whereas it's only about 41% for Facebook, to put that into perspective. So MoPub is a strategic acquisition that plays into that and allows them to expand their mobile advertising footprint and offering.
You mentioned earlier the whole idea about engagement. Will Twitter be able to move beyond sort of this niche player? What kind of additional products, initiatives does Twitter need to bring forth? They're going to be having their conference call shortly, and that, I understand, is what most of the questions are going to be about.
That's right. One of the things we've heard them, their CEO and COO talk about a lot in recent months is kind of simplifying the user interface so that it's something more understandable and more appealing to the masses, as opposed to it's kind of this quirky thing and has complicated syntax that appeals to the people that are engaged with it today. So that they're making a lot of strides in terms of doing that, simplifying their user base, kind of releasing the glossary of the syntax, and doing things like that. And those are a lot of sort of blocking and tackling type short-term tactics that they're doing. Something that they haven't, they've maybe deliberately been a little bit vague about is their long-term strategy around that. And I think the heart of that is going to be in them really understanding the types of conversations that are taking place on Twitter, and they have a plethora of information and big data around that, and then seeing if they can develop marketing strategies to really get the people who are engaged in Twitter today, and it's 250 million of them, to really be sort of brand ambassadors of Twitter and the experience to people in their lives and their networks. So if they do that well, that's something that they'll succeed in. The Pew Research Center actually just did a very interesting study on analyzing all the types of conversations taking place on Twitter, and they said they came out with 6 archetypes of the types of conversations that ultimately people have. So they use some of that kind of information and develop strategies to really ignite passion and engagement based on the types of people and types of networks that are organically forming on Twitter. I think that's going to be the winning strategy for them to try and build engagement.
It strikes me when I look at my own feed, I've got the investment business, we've got the journalist area, media, entertainment. You're in a management consultancy firm. Do you actively use Twitter, and are you the kind of person that they want to add to the discussion?
And that's a great question. I think people like you and me, Francis, are absolutely their target sweet spot. I'm very much active on it because we're people who sort of have followings, or we've got a point of view out there, and Twitter becomes a great PR communication platform for people that want to kind of project their opinion or their perspective on different topics out there to the masses. So we're definitely their sweet spot, as are celebrities, other kind of business executives that are in the spotlight, brands and products as well. What they're trying to do is extend from that into sort of the masses, and that's been their challenge, something they haven't been able to really navigate so far.
Kosha, thank you very much for joining us. Kosha Gada, principal at A.T. Kearney, and she was joining us from New York. Coming up next, U.S. home prices are flatlining, and a little later, investing in Russia in the midst of the Ukraine crisis.